Hello and welcome to Perspectives. Megan Gilmore began life just down the road from Grant County in Elwood, Indiana. She was a victim of automobile accidents at an early age, but she's turned her life's challenges into ways to point others through their crises to new beginnings. And that includes the ministry of something called Lark, which is focused on many different ages. And we want to hear more about that and many other things as we welcome Megan Gilmore to the program. Lark Song.
Yeah.
Is where I want to start, which is what you're doing now. We'll get to the beginning,
Sure.
early life. But Lark Song involves life coaching. So how did life coaching develop, and how did that develop into life's Lark Song for you?
Sure. So I actually, during my graduate program, was an assistant here at Indiana Wesleyan University in an office called the Center for Life Calling and Leadership. While I was there, I was exposed to life coaching and had the opportunity to do some advanced training in it. And it really changed my life. All of my other training was in counseling or mental health. And this just took a different approach to developing people's potential and looking at how do we help someone flourish and gain fulfillment rather than how do we solve problems or get them to a place of healthy functioning. And that just, it made my heart sing. So I'm really passionate about helping people journey to freedom. And I don't think that journey stops when we get healthy or overcome trauma or mental illness. So during my coach training program, we had to develop these life purpose statements. And mine ended up being, I am the Lark's song that awakens courage. I never thought that would develop into an organization, but later on, I went through a whole branding process so as we were starting the organization, and it just became evident that we should call it Lark Song. Because what we wanted to do through all of our programs and educational initiatives was help other people step into courageous choice around just what was next in their life. Larks are symbols of daybreak and courage throughout history and mythology and literature. And so what does it look like for you to step into this new day with courage in a way that's going to lead to your fulfillment and flourishing? And coaching is one way to do that. It's one service that we can offer.
When someone hires a coach or contracts a coach through volunteer work or whatever, what does that look like? What does that coach do? It's different than counseling,
right?
But it's someone with some training and expertise to tell you to do what?
Yeah, so actually a coach doesn't tell you to do anything. They partner with you and they trust fully in your own creativity and resourcefulness. A coach doesn't come to you thinking anything is broken or that you have problems necessarily that they need to solve for you. They see you as a whole person and someone that has relationships that they don't have. So our biggest objective as coaches is to create an environment and a relationship that leads to new learning or insight for the client and then new habit creation. So almost always a client is coming to a coach because they're motivated to see some sort of change in their life, whether that's professionally or personally. And they have come up against obstacles or challenges where they can't effectively manage that change or get to it as quickly as they would want on their own. So they would approach a coach to help them overcome those obstacles and create creative solutions to that problem.
How is that different from counseling?
Yeah, so if you think about counseling, a counselor, you would go to a counselor typically if there's some sort of pain that needs healed or something that's dysfunctional in your life that you're having difficulty overcoming. The way that Martin Seligman puts it is that psychology for many, many, many years was focused on making miserable people less miserable. And that is perfect. We want miserable people to become less miserable, right? Mm-hmm. But we don't want to leave them there. So I would say that typically, and this is painting with broad brush strokes, counselors take people that are miserable, wherever it might be in relationship or in mental health, and they diagnose what the problem is, and then they come up with a treatment plan that helps make them less miserable. A coach comes in, usually when they're less miserable, and says, okay, we don't know what's next for you, but we do know that there's something better and fuller, something more holistic and integrated for your life. And what we want to do is take you from this less miserable place to flourishing. So a coach partners with their client to get them there. It's very much based in positive psychology, which has only emerged in the last few decades as something that people have hung their hat on and say, okay, the research is good, like this is going somewhere. Yeah.
And there's training, there's degree programs, there's a, I don't know, is it to the level of licensing or just certification that we would call that?
Yeah, it's certification right now. There's a there has been a conversation going on in the coaching community about whether we even want licensure to happen, because there would be pros and cons to that. Most coaches don't want licensure to become a thing, because a lot of coaches operate and practice between state lines and between even country lines. So once you add licensure into the mix, that's a state-run thing, and it starts limiting us in ways that we frankly just don't like. But certification is what gives the coach credibility.
So you learned this in the context of a university and life skills, but you now with Lark Song doing this on your own, and it's not the totality of who you are, but it's a big part of your life. What do you like about it? When you see the chance to change, what do you like about that?
Oh, wow. What I love about it is that it's always unpredictable. So if you're coming to a person with incredible strengths and passions and life experiences that you only know maybe a fraction of what they've been able to overcome or how their resiliency has served them or whatever, and you say, what goals do you want to work toward? Or what are some hot spots in your life or some challenges that you want to overcome? And together you create these goals or objectives. They always surprise me. It's a profession where people are exceeding my expectations constantly. And as a visionary, most of my life has not been people exceeding my expectations. It's usually managing disappointment, right? But with coaching, people are constantly exceeding my expectations, and they're surprising me with their creativity and their courage. It's inspiring. And when I work with my coaching clients, it creates this it builds up a trust in humanity, basically. I can watch the news, or I can sit with a coaching client. And I try to do both, but the coaching client is the one that brings this tenacious hope for what could be better.
To live every day with seeing positive results and hope, I guess that could be pretty motivating as well.
Yeah, it is.
Do you have a certain type? I mean, do they cut across all age groups, or is it people like myself with a little gray hair, maybe having a midlife crisis?
Sure.
What's your demographic profile of the person who seeks out coaching?
Yeah, it does totally depend on the coach. So just like in any other profession, whether it be medical services or mental health services or even education, there are different institutions and coaches that meet a different niche or market. And so the coaches that I work with serve a vast array of people, from children to retirees. There are a couple of our coaches that have created something called the Sincera Project, which specifically looks at people in their third of life finding fulfillment and renewed purpose. And then we also have the Little Lark's Wellbeing curriculum that looks at some of the youngest kiddos and says, how can we instill a sense of holistic well-being and purpose literacy from a young age? So I specifically work with entrepreneurs and authors and leaders, a lot of people in ministry and pastors. That's my niche.
What are they looking for? Entrepreneurs, ministry, pastors, a lot of those people have kind of similar skill sets. If we did a Myers-Briggs on them or something like that, we would find, I think, some similar patterns. What are they looking for a coach to help them do?
They're looking for a coach usually to help them overcome their own fear around living fully and taking big steps that whether it's someone in their family would say, that doesn't seem very practical, or that's not what you went to school for, or what about this other thing that you built? They need help navigating what we would call limiting beliefs or saboteurs or imposters internally that say, not yet, you're too young, you're too old, you don't have enough money, you don't have enough people, no one will listen to you. You know, they have big visions and big dreams, and the people that I typically work with, kind of the common thread is that they see clearly a way that things could be better, but they don't always understand the path to get there. And so we help craft a path.
I don't mean this in a cynical way, but is this a function of a flourishing society? In other words, if we went back 100 years ago, we might say your life goal is to put food on the table and get through to the next day. We went back 200 years ago, certainly to say that. We're kind of at a state now where these kinds of crisis points actually are great opportunities because some of those basic needs are maybe covered, or maybe these are people who, they know they've got security in the job, but they want to take it to the next level. Is that fair?
No.
No, it's not fair.
No, I think that a lot of people would assume that, though, because it operates off of an assumption that there are broken people and there are whole people, or there are people that are underprivileged and then there are people that are privileged. There are people that don't have resource and then there are people that do. And from a coaching perspective, we say that everyone has resource. Everyone has abundance and everyone has poverty. Mine just might look different than yours. And so we actually work with several organizations that coach people out of generational poverty. It's been really crazy that we've rooted ourselves in Marion, Indiana, where we have one of the highest child poverty rates in the state, and then our international outreach is one of the poorest countries in the world in Zambia, Africa. So no, it's more a paradigm shift on our part. And I think the other assumption that comes into play sometimes is that there is a hierarchy of needs, right? That you have these basic needs and that coaching needs look more like the esteem and self-actualization. Whereas I would disagree with a hierarchy of needs and say people have universal needs. And whether or not you lived 100 years ago, or you're living in Boot Street, or you're living in Africa, or you're living in New York City, you still have a universal need for significance and contribution. You still have a universal need for love and connection. You still have a universal need for purpose. So that can look a lot of different ways, I think. And people are so creative. So they figure it out, whether they figure out how to reach their goals and how to make their lives better. But I think a lot of times we judge what better means based on our experience and our frame of reference. Yeah. Great response to that. And we want to hear more about how you got from there to here, but we're going to take a break. When we come back, more with Megan Gilmore on Perspectives. So you see Megan Gilmore still making a difference every day out there in the workforce, and Lark Song and various things that took you from the university setting to starting your own work. And you're also a mom, and so we'll get into that a little bit. But I want to take you back to Elwood, Indiana. Sure.
Just down the road here. We all pass there sometimes on the way. Growing up in Indiana, any formative experiences that came out of that, or it was just kind of a normal childhood? We want to talk about those accidents we mentioned early. When did those happen?
Sure. So I actually was born in Alexandria, Virginia, and then moved to Elwood when I was about 3 years old. So I went back to Alexandria during my teenage years, but all of my formative years were in Elwood. And I grew up, I was the oldest of 5, and when I was 6 years old, we were in a head-on collision with a semi, and everyone turned out okay, which was miraculous. And as a 6-year-old, I just thought it was really great that I got to sit with my sisters on a hospital bed, and they wheeled us around everywhere, and nurses took care of our...
How long was the recovery period?
Oh, very fast. We were in and out of the emergency room and a recovery room within the same day. So that was quick and didn't leave much of a scar except this impression in me as a young child that that my Heavenly Father takes care of me. And then when I was 12, I was in another collision that was very serious and had lots of lacerations on my face and went through the windshield really bad. It just so happened that on that day in Little Elwood, Indiana, the best cosmetic surgeon in the state was on call. And so he was able to do my surgery and reconstruct some things. And but I had lots of scars and lots of stitches as a 12-year-old girl. I was in the intensive care unit for a few days and then had recovery at home a few weeks after that. And all of the things that came along with that as a 12-year-old, whether it was realizing who my real friends were and who would leave or make fun of me because I looked a certain way or whatever. And then when I was 16, I drove a golf cart off of a bridge and it landed on top of me and I almost drowned, and that was horrific as well. All of those things did physical trauma to my body, but it also made adults in my life say things like, oh, wow, Megan, God must be saving you for something really big, you know? For some reason, that didn't come across the way they probably meant it. To me, that there was a lot of pressure to perform perfectly, and my worth was whether or not I was doing the big thing that God had set out for me, and if I wasn't, maybe next time I was in an accident, I'd just not be here anymore, you know? So that was hard, but also incredibly formative. And I think that the thing that it still gives me today is this concept that life is precious and every day can be lived on purpose. That my purpose or my fulfillment or my ability to flourish isn't somewhere out in the distant future or a box I can check off when I get to the finish line, but it's something to be experiencing on a daily basis.
If I was around then and I saw multiple kinds of accidents with vehicles and recovery, especially the second one, I would say, you're going to tell me this person is going to tell people 30 years in the future or whatever, or 20 years in the future that you have resources and everyone has struggles, but you also have the opportunity to recover. That would seem to be the kind of thing that would knock a lot of people down.
Yeah.
Long term, it seems to have done the opposite for you.
Yes. Yeah, and I've heard that a lot. I've heard people comment on my resiliency or my strength through that whole process, and to me that seems like, well, of course you just keep going, you know, and whether it's that struggle or someone else's struggle, the fact that any of us are here right now doing what we're doing and getting up and for the most part smiling and interacting with other people with love and grace as much as we can muster says so much, I think, about who we are and how strong we are and what we're able to overcome.
I was going to say, how does that make you coach differently?
I think that I'm very direct, so I don't take crap from people very well. So if they're going to be fluffy or give me excuses about why they can't do something that they know is right for them, I don't listen to that. And I think that directness, that characteristic in me as a coach is different from other coaches. Other coaches might be a lot more empathetic than I am when it comes to people's disadvantages. But when I'm coaching someone and I hear about their disadvantages, I see the opportunity for something incredible, and I want them to be able to see that too.
You've mentioned your faith a couple of times. Was this something you kind of grew up with in a Christian home, or was there this moment of decision, this moment of confrontation, maybe through some of these crises where you own this kind of your own? We would use the language in evangelical circles, you made a decision, but maybe it was more of an evolution for you.
Yeah, I think it was sort of an evolution for me. I did grow up in a Christian home. I feel like my parents were trying to sort out their Christianity as I was growing up a little bit, but I always knew I was loved. I always was taught about God and Jesus, and so I feel incredibly blessed to have had that foundation. But in terms of personal ownership, it was when I was on a wilderness trip when I was 16 or 17 years old that I felt like I understood how God speaks to me personally in a very real way. And that's when I would say the owning started to take place, where I really started to seek after, okay, what's next for me and how do I relate to God and what does that mean for how I live in this world and in relationship with each other. So probably during that 16 to 17 years old frame is when it really meant something to me.
You found your way to Indiana Wesleyan University, not far from home.
Right.
What year was this by now?
2002.
2002.
Yeah.
Okay. And psychology and leadership seemed to be a fit.
Right, it did, yes. So when I was 17, I felt like I had this revelation of this place that God wanted me to start, which ended up, I thought it was completely revolutionary, but there's not really a whole lot new under the sun. So I found out later that it was basically residential therapy with lots of different dimensions of therapy that other people had already started and formed. When I was 17, I didn't know that, so I thought I was blazing this new trail.
Most of us at age 17 think we know
Right?
a lot of new things.
Yeah, exactly. So I found out later that it was residential therapy, and since I didn't think anyone else was doing it, I had to kind of figure out, okay, what major would fit this sort of work, and psychology and leadership seemed to be the right path, because I'd be working with people in their mental health, and I would be directing something. So that's what led me there.
We don't have time to cover the all-important subject of family, but somewhere along the way
Sure.
you got married, children.
Yes.
You can mention those briefly.
Yeah, so Evan and I have been married for 10 years. We were college sweethearts, started dating my sophomore year in college, and then miraculously I have 2 children. When I was 20, doctors told me that I wasn't going to be able to have children, and I have one son, Elliot, who's 8 years old right now, and Isabella's 4.
Now, is that connected to the accidents in any way, or is that the other issues?
I think it very well could have been connected to the accidents, but we didn't know about how that trauma affected the rest of my body until I was older. So yeah, I was diagnosed with this syndrome. They said that's not really going to be a possibility for you. Evan and I were dating at the time, so I told him, you might want to find someone else. And he said, no, we'll foster or adopt if we want to have kids. And then 6 months into our marriage, we found out we were pregnant with Elliot. So
we don't have a lot of
pretty
time to unpack this, but you also have an sort of adopted son in Zambia.
Yeah.
Can you give the 30-second version of that?
Sure, yeah. Whiteson is 20 years old, and he is finishing up grade 10 in Zambia. We can't wait to be able to see him again, but we go over as often as possible to see him and make sure he's flourishing as much as he can.
So your life is defined, obviously, by family and those kinds of issues. You're involved with your husband in ministry, God's House here in Marion, and also these issues of Lark Song, which we've talked about a lot. It sounds exciting. I guess if I'm trying to find a thread there, and it's maybe you should find the thread and not me, because you've lived it, it seems like your life has been giving hope. You've come from a position of trying to find hope through some difficult things. Is that a fair thing? Most of these things you've kind of maneuvered into, backed into, whatever circuitous route, your life has been about giving hope in multiple ways.
Yeah, that's really a beautiful thread. I don't think I've heard it that way before. But a couple of years ago, God said, he lined up. Sometimes when it's like every sermon you hear, every song that comes on the radio is about the same thing. And for me, it was that about hope a while ago. And I read this poem by Emily Dickinson where it was so beautiful. And she said, hope is the thing with feathers and it never asks a thing of you. And I was like, that's ridiculous. Like, hope has asked so much of me, and found a better quote about how it's like this tenacious tiger, right? And so that's
hope is work.
It is. Yes.
It's work to give it. It's work to receive it sometimes.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we think of it as this lofty, beautiful, sunshiny thing, and hope is something that happens usually when you're in the dark, and you have to hang on to it. So yeah.
Well, you have more time in your life, as we said early on. She's quite young,
Yeah,
as you can tell.
I'm 32.
And last 10 seconds, what do people need to hear? You coach a lot of people. What do they need to hear?
They need to hear that they're capable and that they are uniquely valuable. They need to know that they're worthy and infinitely loved. They need to know that no matter what happens, they can overcome it with the help of the people that love them and a God that cares for them personally. And they also need to know that if ever they need someone to champion them, we're here. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that with Grant County.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that need to hear it for sure, and we did too.
Yeah.
Perspectives is about the stories of Grant County, like Megan's, and various people across Grant County and Central Indiana. If you know someone you'd like us to meet, talk to, it's email us at wiwutv@nwest.edu or send us a note to Perspectives, WIWUTV, 4201 South Washington Street, Marion, Indiana, 46953. I'm Randall King. Thank you so much for joining us.